Anyway, continuing on the themes of decades and what have you, the 60s are, when I think of the 60s, I just naturally think of flower power in the music and San Francisco and wearing flowers in your hair and all of that. So, but the 60s connotate something different. There's a couple major milestones, 65 being the kind of like the big number in a lot of cases. And it's a very emotional and weighted sort of time, I think. And you have a little bit more experience dealing with clientele that are getting close to that magic age. I've actually just had some interesting conversations about that. I think we're going to touch upon, but lead us off. Tell me tell me about the 60s.
There are a lot of big decisions to be made in the 60s, and decisions that have ramifications for the rest of your life, pretty much in terms of retirement planning. Like
And
I
it's
know
a
you
long
said,
life, right? 65 is not old, right? It's a long. There's still decades ahead of you, according to the actuaries, right? So
the story goes long ago. The German government and the Second Reich back in the who was it? Otto von Bismarck. They invented the pension plan at a time when it seems normal to start a pension in your 60s, and then you'd get it for like 5 years, and then you die. I mean, sadly, that was how it was. So there was not a lot of planning around living another 30 years from 60 something onward.
Who could envision that?
So that's how retirement planning has changed drastically over the last 100 and something years. And that's where we are today. And when Canada Pension Plan and Old Age Security came along, so what happens when you're in your 60s? The normal retirement age in Canada presently is 65, as far as these plans are concerned. There was some talk about this changing in years past. At one point, the government pushed back the Old Age Security start date to 67. Ooh. And that was supposed to be a phased-in change, and it was meant to make OAS more sustainable long-term. A lot of other countries have made that move already. A lot of the other G20 countries have made the move to pushing back to about 67 for normal age, and then you get a discount at an earlier age. In Canada, we reversed the decision, went back to 65 as a normal age, but
it's a good voting block.
It's what's the only thing that's really been changed with OAS in the last couple of years is that they added an extra income at age 75. So you make it to 75, from that point onward, you're getting a higher OAS. That's probably more sustainable because people, the number of people that reach 75 is smaller than the number that reach 65. So the issue, though, being with a 65 retirement date, a lot of people are working past 65. And obviously, we're living longer lives. Old age security, people have to remember, is basically a government benefit. It is just paid for through tax dollars. It's not funded. Canada Pension Plan
came along, I think, in the 70s. That's right, specifically.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Canada Pension Plan you contribute to. There's a fund. Oftentimes, I speak to younger clients, and we do our retirement planning, and they say, well, how do I know CPP is going to be there? And I see the conversations on Twitter a lot, especially just this past weekend. A friend of ours, Mark McGrath, has been sort of picking fights with people on CPP on Twitter, where there's always some naysayers that say CPP is unsustainable. We're not going to get it at our age. It's just a tax. Yeah. And of course, it's all a bunch of baloney. CPP is very well funded, $600 billion, like $650 billion in it. I was actually, just to kind of name some Twitter names, Tyler Bexty is very active on Twitter. He's someone with Rebel Media. So, you know kind of where his political leanings are. He was making the case that, CPP is going to go bankrupt. And I replied, so what happens with the $650 billion? And no response, of course. But that aside, CPP we contribute to. CPP will be there for all of us who are contributing to it. OAS, I don't know 100% if it will be. Now, the key things at age in our 60s is we have some decisions to be made. Old age security, at least currently, starts at 65. You have a choice. You can defer it as late as 70, and you get a little bit extra. What is the amount again? Do you remember? Is it still 0.5% per month extra after age 65?
Ends up, 6-7% per year. It's approximately, it's a reasonable rule of thumb,
It's a little bit less than deferring Canada Pension Plan. So with Canada Pension Plan, an issue I have with a lot of people is, well, for one, I usually, when I do a financial plan for people, we look at the different scenarios. When does it make more sense to start Canada Pension Plan? For most people, it makes sense to start it a bit later. A couple of key factors I think that apply for most people. I think we did a podcast a while back on when to start CPP when we really got into the details on this. But everyone's situation is different. And you have to remember, again, there are no rules of thumb. There's no perfect age to start Canada Pension Plan. If anyone tells you that, again, balderdash. What does malarkey? That's the word that the outgoing president says. So in some situations, it does make sense to start it earlier. In many situations, it makes sense to start it later. The vast majority of Canadians that are reaching these ages now have started working at a time post the defined benefit pension plan being the norm. So currently in Canada, I think the stats are about 1/3 of people in their 60s are part of a defined benefit pension plan. 2/3 rely on defined contribution plans or their own savings. A defined benefit plan, just so people understand, that is a plan where there's a formula based on the number of years you've worked for an employer. That's what you're going to get paid out when you're retired.
How much you earned. Yep.
Based on your earnings and how many years you contributed, and it pays for life. That's a nice thing about defined benefit plans. You don't have to worry about the markets, for one.
That's right.
There is a slight chance private defined benefit plans can go under if the fund depletes, but mostly you don't have to worry about the markets. And if you live to 120, you're still going to collect it. And in most cases, it even goes up with inflation. So those are great plans if you have them. Most of us don't. 2/3 of us don't. So what that means is our only defined benefit plans are the Old Age Security and Canada Pension Plan, because they are truly defined benefit plans. They pay for our lifetimes. There's a little bit of a spousal benefit to the CPP. It's not very good, but it is there.
Like you said, because it's only 1/3, it's the opposite, being where the 2/3 of us having a defined contribution. And so the contribution, like by definition, we know how much is going into the plan. We might not know down the road what it'll be valued, what my monthly or annual benefit will be once I start withdrawing from it. But because the vast majority of people out there, or if not already, are transitioning to that type of plan, it's a little bit more, you have to be a little bit more mindful in terms of some of the decisions you make in it and how you do it.
Yeah, we're affected by what the markets do. It's obviously a big negative. If you live very long, you can outlive your money. So what that means is if CPP and OAS are your only defined benefit plans, if you want the income to be higher from them, you're better off starting it later. So you take the one stat on the one hand that most people, 2/3, do not have defined benefit plans. So they benefit from starting later, all else being equal. The other thing is that if you're in your 60s and you're healthy, you have a life expectancy, an average life expectancy of 20-something years. Male, female, non-smoker, it's 20 to 25 years. So you're going to live into your 80s, most likely. At least that's the odds the insurance companies give you. Key thing, this is one thing that people argue is life expectancy is 79 or whatever. No, it's not. Life expectancy at birth is maybe 79 or 80. Life expectancy for someone who's already in their 60s, who's made it that far, and is, cancer-free, isn't a smoker, reasonably good health, they're likely going to live into their 80s, maybe well into their 80s.
Or even longer. It's truly survivorship bias, right? Like if you made it that far, you're probably going to last a lot longer too, right? In that way.
So one thing I looked at, getting back to starting CPP, I did a post on this. It is at muhs.ca/CPP, where, and of course it's linked in the blog post that this is attached to as well, where I just kind of looked at the crossover points for Canada Pension Plan if you started at 60, 65, 70. Now, something to know is the way they calculate the benefit is the normal age is 65. And this is something a lot of people don't get. It's not 60. It's not as soon as you can take it, that's the normal age, and then you're deciding if you want to wait till 65. No, if you're going to take it at 60, you're making an election to take it early. You should not do that unless there's a good reason for you to take it early. We might talk about what some of those good reasons might be. But the normal age is 65, and you get a certain amount. That amount today for retirees, I think $1,300 at maximum, $1,300 a month. So if you've contributed all your life to Canada Pension Plan, you've always done the maximum. I might add a link to this. I just looked it up for myself to see what my lifetime contributions are to CPP. I found out I'm about halfway there to maximum, that if I contribute another 20 years at maximum, I will be at the maximum eligibility. Now, there's a whole bunch more that goes into the equation now for us because there's this additional CPP. We're not going to talk about that today. It's too much.
No, and even other factors like parental leave, things of that nature, right? There's been other changes. There's been adjustments that to think about it for sure.
There are some great resources online. I will link one from my friend Jason Yee out of Saskatchewan. I met him at the conference last month. He has this great calculator on his site where it's kind of like a sliding scale where you can if you can figure it out, it's got a lot of numbers on it. It's a sliding scale where you can figure out in terms of the additional CPP, how much you qualify for based on age. Now, if you're in your 60s, that stuff about additional CPP that was talked about a few years ago, election promise, whatever, that doesn't apply to you. You're not getting any of that. That's for us. You're getting what's already been contributed over the years. So you're getting today roughly $1,300 a month maximum, and less if you have contributed less than the maximum, obviously. And for that, Jason has some really great animations as well, showing you how that is calculated, dropout years, et cetera, et cetera. More or less, you can kind of think of it as your best 40 years relative to YMPE, which is a arbitrary number based on the average industrial wage in Canada, CPP. When you started, if you started earlier than 65, you're penalized. You're going to get penalized by 0.6% per month prior to your 65th birthday. So if you started 24 months prior on your 63rd birthday, it's 24 times 0.6. That percentage is reduced from the normal 65 amount.
Mm-hmm.
Starting at 5 years early is a full 36%. And that's significant. And I've found some people don't even get that. What that means is it's not, I'm getting this lesser amount till 65, then I get the regular amount. You're making that decision, and that's going to affect you for the rest of your life. Yeah. So starting it later, after 65, you're getting 0.7% extra per month.
More.
As much as 42% at age 70, if you started at age 70. Crossover points, the only time it makes sense to start at 60, that's one of the ages I looked at with my graphs, is if you don't expect to live past 73. Once you've lived past 73 versus age 65 start, you've collected 8 years from 65 to 73 versus 13 years from 60 to 73. Those 8 years total more than the 13 years because it's a higher payment amount. If you're looking at age 70 versus age 60, it's about age 82 or so, because those 12 years are more than the 22 years in total. If you just sum up the numbers, forget about the time value of money, it makes sense for most people to start it later. And again, if all else is equal, the CPP and OAS are defined benefit, guaranteed for life, go up with inflation, with the full rate of inflation, not 2/3, but the full CPI. In those ways, it's a really wonderful program. And for most people, their retirement is based on these different buckets of money. CPP, RIF money, we'll talk about that next, OAS, maybe a work pension. And this is a bucket that is guaranteed, and it goes up with inflation, and you can't outlive. And you want to have a mix of different things.
It's nice to have multiple sources of income in retirement. That also complicates things, I think, right? Because we're not just used to one major paycheck that comes in from your main source of employment. Trying to figure out what is the opportune time to start withdrawing from each of the various different kinds of accounts does make it a point. And I think this is a conclusion that we're going to bring up, is that planning a retirement, it can be quite complicated, even more so than perhaps in the years leading up to retirement, right? But you said you said penalize, and I get the understanding in the story that on a month, the earlier you start taking your CPP benefit, the less you get from that benchmark 65 years of age. Concurrently, and as part of the reason why people decide to make that decision is that you start earlier. You are getting it earlier, a year or 2 or 3 or 5 years earlier than what the baseline would be. So that penalty, it does reduce the monthly benefit that you're receiving, but you started earlier. And like you said, and you alluded to, perhaps there are a couple key factors. And I do know somebody, in fact, it's my parents, and my father in particular, he started at 60, and mainly because he needed the income, right? And there was not really, could wait 5 more years before he could start withdrawing on it to get the baseline, and not even 10 years later, right? Because, he needed the funds to assist in life at the time.
Yeah. So we're gonna talk about where does it make sense. So if you really need the money, you should take it. Like, why you don't want to go into debts? You don't want to. You want to limit how much you're taking out of your RIF or other investments. If you're not working and you just need the income to get by, then I guess you have to take it earlier. It makes sense when you know that you don't have a lot of life expectancy for whatever reason.
Yeah.
I advise a lot of clients to start it later, or at least start at 65 when we look at their retirement plans. And more often than not, they go and start it earlier. And it kind of is, like I say in the blog post, the marshmallow test. It's kind of like, I want that marshmallow now. People often kind of think of it as a It's a bet on longevity. And they look at, I mean, yeah, it makes rational sense. If you want to make sure you get that income from having put money into it all these years, you want to make sure you're getting that income, as much of it out of it as possible. And if you live longer, great. You're going to be happy that you live longer, but at least you got your money, or you got more money out, continue getting money out. It's just in terms of the stats where there's a disconnect between reality in terms of people's longevity on average and what people are kind of making it better on. It's kind of like a bad bet. It's a bad bet in the casino. If you were betting on heads or tails, you would not want anything less than a 2-to-1 payout, basically.
Yeah.
Right. And that's what it is. You're making a very conservative bet, and we all have a conservative bias. You're making a conservative bet, but you're not getting a trade-off for it, basically. So yeah, that's I think that covers CPP.
Again, it's going to be around for a long, long time, right? So it's worth repeating, right? Maybe there's decisions about where it's invested, how it's invested, but the point is it's a massive pool on that all working Canadians contribute into, and internationally, it is among the most well-respected pension plans out there as well. So don't ignore that fact that it's actually really darn good, and they do a really good job of managing it for all of us.
Yeah. And put some thought behind when you start it. Don't just do it by impulse. It is a massive, massive decision. It's not something that you're just sort of like an election year doing on your 2024 taxes. It's a decision for your 2024 to 2054 taxes or whatever.
Yeah.
It's that
the rest of your life, as you said.
Yeah. And talk to a financial planner, obviously.
Absolutely.
So another big decision that people make in their 60s or 70s. So I was going to say, when it comes to Canada Pension Plan, what bugs me kind of is when people have started their Canada Pension Plan at age 60, but they're still working and they're still earning a decent income. And they're already at the maximum
plan, but you're still contributing now monthly on a monthly basis towards it, right?
There is a bit of extra contribution going into it. Yes, if you're not at the maximum already, you are contributing ongoing, but you're also drawing money out and you're paying a high level of tax on it because it's additional income on top of your work income. So you're not only hit by that penalty we talked about earlier, but also you're being taxed more. If you had just simply deferred it, you'll be getting a higher income later on. You won't have your employment income and you'll be at a lower marginal tax rate. But yeah, that's another one that kind of bugs me. But let's assume someone's retired at 65 and that's when they've done the right thing and they waited until 65 to start Canada Pension Plan.
Okay.
When do they start their RIF, or do we even know what a RIF is? Most people, I find a lot of people, they save for years and years in their RSP and don't even find out about what a RIF is and how it works until suddenly they get that letter from their financial institution, which is in the year they turn 71. That's the deadline. That tells them you have to convert your RSP to a RIF. And they're like, what's this? How do I do this? What is a RIF? And that's when they have a lot of questions for me.
The RIF-LIF sort of equations, that doesn't come up until, way down the road. And people don't want to think about it potentially until, they're forced to.
It's just like an RESP rather, where there isn't a lot of thought that goes into contributing to it. You don't have to, you just need to save.
Yes.
But then there's a ton of planning that goes on when you're taking money out. I remember when I was at the bank, when I was a financial planner at the bank, and I get the regular bank clientele referred to me. And I once had an older couple. They were referred to me, or someone tried to refer them to me, and they said, "Oh no, we don't need financial planning. We're already retired." When it's like, this is exactly when you need financial planning the most. When decisions you make have the biggest impact, and you have a lot of questions. For that, if you were saving nicely every year, maybe you didn't need a financial planner. If you were saving a good amount into your retirement savings plan every year. The thing with RIFs is too many people wait till 71, even if they retire years earlier, they wait till 71 to convert because they feel like that's some kind of prescribed age when you're supposed to start. The worst thing you can do is start your CPP at 60 and start your RIF at 71. What are you doing? You're taking a penalty on that CPP income from 60 to 70. You're waiting on the RIF, which all that does is it basically allows your RSP to continue to grow. And then you're going to need to take higher payments from it later on. You could have started your RIF earlier, started and deferred your CPP, taken money out of your RIF, at a low tax rate because you don't have CPP income yet.
And now we've just talked for 10 minutes, 15 minutes about delaying CPP and OAS to maximize that benefit. If you can get past 65 and if you can do it till 70, amazing. And then It's almost conversely that when if you think about our RSP and you convert it to a RIF, an income fund, a retirement income fund, is that now, oh, maybe you should actually think about starting that earlier. So I can see some of the, the situations where people get confused. Well, shouldn't you just defer everything to the later or to the latter, right? But the one thing I want to particularly bring up is that even though you're converting this thing, it's only sort of, in some senses, now you have an extra step that you actually have to withdraw money, right? You're no longer contributing anymore. It's the reverse. Now you're taking it out again, right? But it doesn't mean that you cannot still be invested. In fact, you have to still be invested and continue to be investing in it, right? It's not as if everything just flips over to cash and now you're just withdrawing. No.
That's another misconception around RIF. People don't understand that. It's basically, the way this was described to me when I first learned about it, I've brought up this analogy before, I think, is your RSP is like a house. So again, you have to get past this thinking of, I'm going to the bank to buy RSPs, as we did through the 80s. Maybe at that time, you put your money into some GICs. You were buying GICs in your RSP, but people kind of talked about it. The bank used this terminology too. They called it buying an RSP. There's no such thing as buying an RSP. You have an RSP account. That account has things in it, investments in it. GICs, mutual funds, stocks. You get a cryptocurrency in there now if you want as an ETF. But so the thing is, when people don't realize, when you convert that RSP to a RIF, basically your RSP was this house, and a roof, a door. The door is where the money goes in. When you contribute money into the RSP, goes into the door. When you convert it to a RIF, that door gets barred shut. No more money goes into it. The rule is the year after you turn 71, you're not allowed to have an RSP. Technically, you can still contribute to one. If your spouse has an RSP, a spousal RSP, and the spouse is younger, and you're the contributor to it, you can still contribute to that.
Yep.
But you yourself cannot be the annuitant, the person the RSP is for, the main beneficiary of it. So door gets barred shut, and then money has to come out the chimney of the house every year, a little bit.
Oh, the chimney.
Prescribed minimum.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
So if you do what many people do and you wait till 71, and this is another one, it's not your 71st birthday. It's December 31st of the year you turn 71. So let's say it is October 28th as we record this. Today's your 71st birthday. You do not need to rush to the bank to convert your RSP to a RIF. But before December 31st, you're going to have to. And if you don't, your bank or whatever financial institution is going to do it for you automatically somehow. But it's best to take control of that and do that yourself. So the next year, so 71, you turn 71 now, January 1st, the institution looks at whatever the balance is of your RIF and takes that times a percentage. The percentage for 71 is 5.88%. Whatever that is.
Down. These numbers
written
are
down. There's numbers written down. muhs.ca/RIF. You'll see the whole table with all of them. And it is a percentage that goes up every year. The whole idea being that as your balance goes down, you're taking a higher percentage, and it should be relatively level as it goes up, as time goes on. So yeah, you have to take that minimum out every year. So that's why, if you look at that table and you look at what are those numbers in the 60s, in your 60s, those percentages are less. And obviously, again, if you wait till 70 and you haven't taken any money out, 71, 72, whatever, it's a percentage that's higher and it'll be a bigger pie because that account has grown a bit more. Why not start that RIF earlier? In turn, you don't need to spend it. It just means, either if you are spending all your money, you're not taking that money out of somewhere else. What the worst thing people do is they defer their RIF, they defer converting their RSP to the RIF, and they take money out of their non-registered account instead, or worse, they take out of their TFSA. If instead you took money out of your RIF and maybe even use that money to contribute it to your TFSA to keep putting money in every year and maxing it out, you're putting yourself in a better situation long-term. Yes, you're paying a little bit more tax now in your 60s, but it's going to mean less in terms of those minimum required withdrawals, those annual minimum payments. Take that money out sooner, smaller pie down the road, and you're spreading it out over more years. Instead of taking it out over, let's say you live till 90, that'd be 20 years from 71 to 90. Take it out over 30 years. You don't know how long you're going to live. But that's another thing you need to look at. And we'll talk about that in the next episode on advice in your 70s about some estate planning issues. But we'll get back to that.
And I think that's the point. And then we're kind of we're dropping some hints about the future. But the idea there also is that you don't want to necessarily complicate your estate, or if you can minimize the taxation, because you're gonna have to pay tax at some point. It's always about these
Yeah.
things, tax now or tax later. And if you get taxed later, it could be taxed all at once at one time and at a much higher tax rate. And then you had the your beneficiaries will all have to deal with that. Your state will have to deal with that. It becomes a little bit more complicated and potentially a lot more expensive, right? So having the agency to be able to time that, to take out the funds from your RIF accounts and then put it sheltered into a TFSA, for example, or into a non-register, gifting it, or doing whatever you'd like to do, you have some more control. You have much more control, in fact, in doing that, the timing of it, the amount you'd like to take out of it, what you want to do with it, right? Rather than having the executor of your state try to sort that all out, right?
So to summarize the part on RIFs, again, there are no rules of thumb. It's not take it at 71 or take it before 71. No. Every one situation is different. And you can kind of get a feel now for these different moving parts in your retirement plan that affect your decisions. You can have no CPP income in your 60s because you've deferred it, and then you've got this ability to take more out of your RIF. Maybe you're working part-time and your income is just at a level where you don't want to put yourself in a higher tax bracket, potentially hurt your OAS, your old age security. That's something we haven't talked about yet. I think it might come up in the next episode, but old age security clawback.
We've talked about clawbacks a little bit. Well. The boogeyman of the clawback.
We did a whole episode on it in the summer, I think, right? So those are some major pieces, and that's why we do cash flow based financial planning. The last thing, just in terms of we're focusing on people in their 60s. What really is important to people retiring in their 60s? So we talked about when to start CPP is a huge factor. When to convert their RSP to RIF is a huge factor. What do you think?
I'm past buying my Harley at that point in time, so I'm trying to figure out which cruise line to go to. Maybe I decide on where I want to travel next to.
You do bring up some good points, and that's something I forgot to even talk much about. And when I wrote these blog posts a few years ago, it wasn't really top of mind. But having seen my parents aging and through their 70s, and other clients, if you're retiring, if you're fortunate enough to retire in your 60s, and some people can't, they have to keep working because they can't afford to. And if you're in good health, you got to make the most of those years. You really have to, first of all, try to be in good health in your 60s. I think we talked about in a previous episode, being healthy, like in your 40s when you're starting your retirement planning. Now, you and I, it's a good time to make sure we're putting health. Health is top of mind, that we
do some push-ups every time you look at your phone for your, or your, for your stock list. Yeah.
That we make sure we have the money to retire, and also that we have the health to retire healthily. Because it makes no sense saving up all that money and then you're basically a shut-in because you can't do anything. Your 60s might be the last time you can make those big trips to, go to that African safari or wherever. Do it. Spend the money. It might be in your 60s the last time you can really drive a car and appreciate it. When as you get older, they might take your license away, or you're just not going to appreciate 400 horsepower as much.
Yeah. But when you withdraw the funds, when you withdraw these funds for whatever purpose, right, you're going to start withdrawing on it, right? And even though we have multi-decades ahead of us, as I talked about, sometimes you just end up taking the funds out at a time when you need to, but the market isn't necessarily conducive in doing it, right? And I think I can think specifically of 4 years ago or so, when COVID and what have you, and everything just, went straight down. And unfortunately, or maybe because of COVID or some combination thereof, like people had to retire or stopped working, and they were drawing down. And a situation was probably the most inopportune time of doing it, of withdrawing, starting to withdraw, or even withdrawing. And the implications of that, I think, are starting to be felt. And certainly, I had to go through a specific situation where that was acutely felt, right? And it's just a matter of timing, but we can't call those times. I'll call when exactly if we start to what the market's looking like. So I think there's a particular phrase, a sequence of withdrawals, or sequence of returns, and I think that's I think what you're alluding to.
That starts to affect you quite a bit in retirement. And talking about COVID, I seem to recall that year, because COVID hit in February, March, just as people were starting to plan their annual minimum payments, and there was it a suspension of the annual minimum payment, or they allowed people to take less out? That I forget the details of it. It was everything happened so quickly, and at the end it didn't matter because the markets bounced back by summer.
Yeah.
But that was an issue. Let's say you had planned to take your minimum payment for the year. What you had happening was January 1st, the markets were at an all-time high, tippy top high. And we're talking S&P 3,000. We're in the 5,500s now or whatever.
Not 6,000? Go on.
But, at 3,000 something, you were at 3,100, I think, at the beginning of January, and the TSX was near an all-time high. That's what your minimum payment was based on. And then the markets crashed 30 to 40%. And so your minimum payment as a percentage of what you had left in your RIF was kind of a bit high. And they did something, I forget forget the details, but that's neither here nor there. I do remember, though, when I got my start in the industry in 07, 08, there we went through some big fluctuations, especially people with RIFs, where in like 07, it was a high RIF payment. Or 08 was still a high RIF payment at the beginning of the year. That year you had a high payment you had to take out. And then beginning of 09 was the market lows, and suddenly that number was much lower, and then by 10 it was higher again. So the minimum payment amount, which I remember I said it was supposed to go up gradually, for people who had their the RIFs invested fairly aggressively, that number fluctuated quite a bit. And that's not great, right? Because you need more of a steady income stream when you're retired.
Yeah. That's what most people would expect, stability in their income in retirement.
And that's why we need to sort of think about that risk level. What can we tolerate? What are we comfortable with in terms of that volatility? And even if we're comfortable, we've been investing in an aggressive portfolio all these years, and we could withstand a 20%, 30% drop. When you're retired and you have to draw money from these investments, this can make a massive difference, because if you have to take that money out when they're down and then they recover later, your average return's all the same. When you were saving, you got some dollar cost averaging when you bought things when they were down. And overall, for the saver, if you had negative 20%, positive 30%, negative 10%, positive 15%, it all averages out. That if you're a drawer on that income, let's say that sequence of returns is the worst returns are at the beginning of the sequence, and then better returns are at the later end of the sequence.
Quite often.
Now, you've drawn more of your capital out in those early years as the markets went down, and then the recovery happens.
Price. Yes.
Yeah, and when the recovery happens, there's less money invested. So what I'm getting at is those averages, those returns average out, and an average 10% annual, 8% annual, or whatever it happens to be over a span of time, it comes in lumps, right? And when we're saving, it doesn't make a difference.
Incrementally, yeah. But
when we're withdrawing, it makes a massive, massive difference. And what we do as financial planners to plan around that is Monte Carlo scenarios. Now, Monte Carlo, what that does is it basically takes all a scenario. Exactly. It's like throwing the dice in Monte Carlo. I forget why it's called Monte Carlo. Maybe it's because of the racetrack. You're testing a scenario going around the racetrack 100 times, 500 times.
Casino. Got to do it 1,000 times and go on the craps table.
Like a financial plan will have, this is how much you're saving. This is your expected growth rate. This is how much you're going to spend, take out, all these different variables. Now, run the scenario 500 times with different rates of return, different orders of return. So that rate of return is 6% annually for 30 years. But we're going to run one scenario where it is, this order of returns, negative 10, negative 15, positive 15, et cetera. And then there's another scenario with a different order of returns. Those make big differences. And if you're in a fairly aggressive portfolio, your range of outcomes, which I illustrate in the blog post with the graph, the range of outcomes can be quite wide. What can we do about that? And one thing is maybe reduce your risk level if you don't want to see that range of outcomes.
Yeah, tighten up that range of outcomes to a closer point where the median or the average, the mean of the returns is pretty close or much more palatable than the wide range, right? You can have, what is it? The head in the furnace and the feet outside, and you're still at a comfortable 20 degrees sort of idea, or do you actually just kind of be, sitting in the living room, fully your entire body in the, at a comfortable time, right? So that average.
That's a weird analogy, but
yeah. I'm paraphrasing it, but you get the visual, right? And average doesn't mean exactly what the range, the range could be quite high. So tighten up that range is sort of what you're entailing.
Yeah, and so the other thing too is when you're retired, you have to plan around that too. Maybe what you can do is, and I know a lot of my colleagues in the industry consider this suboptimal, which is to have a cash wedge strategy of some sort. This is especially useful now with interest rates being a bit higher. It really was not great years ago when you were looking at 1%
Nope.
interest rates, not being able to
Yep.
invest that money in the markets. But if you're getting a decent rate of interest on GICs and cash, having a certain amount of money aside that you're drawing on for your expenses, letting that build up to some extent, maybe 3 years worth or 5 years worth, that's a matter of taste, how much risk you want to take. And that way, if the markets are down for a prolonged period of time, you have that cash wedge where you can draw money out of and wait for the markets to recover, as opposed to taking money out of the stock markets when they're down. And then when the markets are strong, then you would take your money out of the markets to basically fund you, as well as to rebuild your cash wedge. So that's
Hmm.
something a lot of people do. And again, there is some controversy around it. Is it better, all else being
Yep.
equal for most people? It does provide some comfort in that people then don't have to worry as much, or if they, if they worry about the markets going up and down, and they know they have a couple hundred, maybe not a couple hundred, 100,000 cash on the side,
Hmm.
on the sidelines to fund their next couple of years, they're not
Yeah,
too worried about the markets being down as much. Like me, I
that's
don't
right.
worry about the markets being down for my RSP because my retirement's 20 years away.
Hmm.
If you're retired now, it can be very stressful when the markets go down. Having the extra
Absolutely.
cash does help quite a bit.
Hmm. When we need to take out funds, we need to take out funds, and we can't time what or have any degree of planning or control over what the market is doing at the time. But we can, I don't want to call it engineer, but we can develop specific individualized sort of outlooks to your comfort level or the allocation to say, yeah, this it might flip around a little bit, bounce around, but we may have a solution in place. Or there's other things that we haven't talked about, like annuities and what have you, that maybe minimize that even further, right? But there are certainly
Mm-hmm.
solutions, and you can use them all in some sort of combination in order to get the appropriate and what is best suited for you and your situation, right? But again, all these are a lot of different parts, right? Like I didn't have to think about this when I'm 20, 30, 40, 50, and all of a sudden, all these things that are moving around in different income sources and all these different ways of taxation, and I'm forced to take a certain amount or not. It sounds a little complicated at times, I
And you,
must
you just
admit.
added complexity with talking
Yes.
annuities. I mean, we're not going to
Yeah.
get into that
Sorry.
today, but
No, they
that's something
exist.
we'll bring Jeff onto the podcast for that,
Yes.
to talk about annuities. But I mean, that's another thing to think of too. When you going back to the RSP to RIF conversion,
Yeah.
the choices you have at age 71 with a RIF, or whenever you want to do something with your RSP,
Hmm.
is you either take all of your money out. If you wait till 71, you have to take all of it out all at once, be taxed on all of it at once, and then you can do whatever you want with it, or convert it to a RIF and take it out little by little. Or the third option that's always been there, though not a lot of people do that, is you can buy a registered annuity with that money. And for some people, it might be worthwhile looking at that, especially at times when rates are at decent levels where the annuity payout is decent. So an annuity, will really try to summarize this as much as we can here with another disclosure that any insurance products, which is what an annuity is, are
It
offered
is.
via Canaccord Wealth and Estate Planning Services Limited by insurance licensed representatives like myself or Jeff, my colleague, but is not a CGWM thing. That aside, the annuity, it may give people a little bit more peace of mind if they are someone who does not sleep well at night when the markets are fluctuating. You do give something up. So you're trading off volatility of your investments and the chance of dying at a very late age where you could run out of money in order to purchase this annuity. The annuity saves your bacon if you live till 120 because it's going to keep paying for your lifetime. It doesn't work out so well if you die early. It can work out favorably anyways. You don't have to worry about the markets, but you do pay a lot for it. You're basically having an insurance company take that risk for you.
But yeah, we can park that for sure. I think all of these comments and topics that we've mentioned today, hopefully it paints a picture where a lot of people think about retirement and a lot of think about it as an end. You're in a marathon or whatever. You pass the finish line, right? You cross the tape, right? You got there, right? But in fact, it's only half of it. Half the journey is getting to there. The other half of the journey, great visualization, is afterward. What do we do about it afterwards?
We didn't talk about this much, but something a lot of people, a trap a lot of people fall into is you've been saving all your life for retirement. You do at some point have to switch to spending.
Not
And,
easy.
we financial advisors, most of us will probably advise you not to because we want to invest your money for you. But Realistically, if we look at your overall retirement plan, sometimes that plan might be spending a certain amount over your 60s and 70s, spending less later on because of
Hmm.
health reasons, and then maybe spending more later on because you need more health care. But that's all part of that big picture cash flow based retirement plan. Having the biggest thing that people can have when they are retired, the biggest value Justin and I can provide, and a friend Jeff, is that comfort level that you can spend that money in retirement. If you don't have a financial plan and you're just worried about seeing that pile of money tick down as you're spending it, that's no way to live. That's stressful, and then you get a market crash and everything. If you have a retirement plan where you can afford to spend this much, you're going to spend less in your 70s, probably late 70s, because you can't afford to travel as much. But knowing you can spend that early when you should is such a nice level of comfort that I think is priceless.
Yeah, no, it is. And again, it's retirement is not simple. All right. All of those behavioral things, changing your behavior, spending, various cash flows, it all, points to the fact that there's a lot of planning that happens. And to what your clients had said in the past, you certainly do need it. If any time, right, it's when now you're effectively, implementing the second half of that financial plan. If you didn't have a financial plan, so then do it for retirement.
Okay. Think anything else you can think of? We'll be back in a couple of weeks for financial advice for people in their 70s and beyond. And then we'll go back to podcasts and various other issues.
It's been a lot of material to go through, and every decade, every period has been a little bit different. So I hope that the engagement is sort of there, and you see the differences that happen over time, and the questions and the things you may need to think about as you go on your journey.
All right.
Good. Thanks.
So long for now.